From the outside, my life seemed perfect. Emma and I had been married for 6 years, and she was the kind of person everyone described as the life of the party. It was one of the things that first drew me to her. Her energy, her charisma, her warmth. But over the past few months, that warmth had felt increasingly absent. The shift started subtly. Emma started spending more time with her new best friend Caleb. I knew Caleb as Emma's college friend who'd re-entered her life a couple of years ago. He was openly gay, and I had no reason to doubt his orientation or their friendship. I liked Caleb, or at least, I thought I did. He was funny, sharp, and a great conversationalist, though admittedly, I sometimes caught him giving me looks that I couldn't quite decipher. Emma began mentioning Caleb more frequently. They'd started going to yoga together. Shopping trips were suddenly our thing. And Emma always came back glowing after their outings. At first, I chalked it up to her needing someone to confide in, someone who wasn't me. I didn't mind. After all, everyone needs friends outside their marriage, right? But then the late-night text began. At first, I laughed it off when I saw Emma giggling at her phone late at night. Caleb must be cracking jokes again, she'd say, tucking her phone away with a practiced nonchalance. I wanted to believe her, but the laughter didn't feel light-hearted. It felt secretive. One night, Emma told me she was going to Caleb's place to help him decorate. I didn't question it, though something inside me twisted. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. At 2 a.m., I finally called her, only for it to go straight to voicemail. When she finally came home at 3:30 a.m., she smelled of wine and gave me a vague excuse about how they'd lost track of time. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But then there were the whispers. Friends and neighbors occasionally made offhand comments like, "Emma and Caleb are inseparable," or, "You're such a cool husband to be so understanding." Understanding of what? I wondered. Was I being naive? The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. I was cleaning up the kitchen when Emma's phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at it out of habit, and the message from Caleb lit up the screen. "Last night was incredible. When can we do it again?" My breath caught. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I waited for Emma to walk back into the room, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. What had happened last night? And why did I feel like I was about to uncover something I'd never be able to unsee? I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I slipped her phone back onto the counter and tried to act normal while my mind churned. Was I overreacting? Caleb was gay. Emma had said it 100 times. But that text, that wasn't the kind of thing you said about shopping trips or late-night talks over wine. That night, I found myself spiraling, my mind filled with images of what last night might have been. I replayed every interaction I'd witnessed between Emma and Caleb, every glance, every laugh. Had I missed something? Had I been so blind? I needed to know the truth. I couldn't live with the uncertainty gnawing at me. So, when Emma fell asleep that night, I quietly unlocked her phone. My heart hammered as I navigated to her messages with Caleb. What I found made my stomach drop. The texts were worse than I imagined. There were no explicit confessions of love or betrayal. Caleb was careful with his words, but the subtext was glaring. Messages about how he couldn't stop thinking about her, how amazing she was, and how nobody makes me feel this way. Emma's responses weren't outright reciprocation, but they were far from dismissive. She told him he was special, and that their time together was something she'd never forget. The anger came first, hot and searing. Then, a creeping confusion. Caleb was gay, wasn't he? Had Emma lied to me about that all along? Or was this something else entirely? The next day, I decided to test the waters. I casually brought up Caleb during breakfast. "You and Caleb have been spending a lot of time together lately," I said, keeping my tone light. Emma looked up from her coffee, her face unreadable. "Yeah, he's been going through some stuff. I'm just trying to be a good friend." "What kind of stuff?" "Oh, just, personal things. He's been feeling lonely." She reached for her phone, clearly eager to end the conversation. But I wasn't done. "It's funny," I said, forcing a laugh. "The way some people talk. You'd think you and Caleb were more than friends." Her hand froze mid-reach, and her eyes snapped to mine. "What people?" she asked, her tone sharper than I expected. I shrugged. "Just things I've overheard. I mean, you guys are close, right?" Emma leaned back in her chair, her posture suddenly defensive. "Caleb is my friend, she said firmly. That's it. I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but my gut told me there was more she wasn't saying. That night, I decided to follow her. I hated myself for it. I wasn't the kind of person who spied on their spouse, but I needed answers, and Emma wasn't giving them to me. When she said she was meeting Caleb for dinner, I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and tailed her car. She drove to a trendy bar downtown, one I knew she and Caleb frequented. I parked a few spaces away and watched as she got out of the car and walked inside. I debated going in, but the thought of confronting her in public felt too risky. Instead, I stayed in my car, hoping to catch a glimpse of them leaving. An hour passed, then two. Finally, just after 10 p.m., Emma and Caleb emerged. What I saw next turned my world upside down. They were holding hands, not in a casual, friendly way, but in a way that screamed intimacy. Caleb pulled Emma close and whispered something in her ear that made her laugh. My stomach churned as I watched him open the car door for her, his hand lingering on the small of her back. I stayed frozen in my car, unable to move as Caleb drove away with my wife in his passenger seat. I had my answer, but it only left me with more questions. What was Caleb's game? And what exactly had my wife gotten herself into? I barely slept that night. My mind replayed the scene of Caleb and Emma holding hands, her laugh, the way he touched her back like it was second nature. It felt like someone had cracked my ribs open, leaving me exposed and raw. I needed clarity. The next morning, I resolved to dig deeper. If Emma wouldn't give me the truth, I'd find it myself. I began with Caleb. I remembered Emma mentioning Caleb's social media accounts, so I spent hours scrolling through his posts. They were harmless at first. Photos of nights out with friends, captions about yoga classes, witty commentary on the latest shows. But as I dug further back, I found something peculiar. An old post from 2 years ago, tagged with Emma. It was a group shot, but Caleb and Emma were standing close, his arm casually draped over her shoulder. The caption read, "Can't believe how lucky I am to have this queen in my life, Red Heart." I frowned. Lucky seemed like an odd choice of words for a friend, but it wasn't damning. Still, the post lingered in my mind as I scrolled through dozens more, noticing how often Emma featured in his photos. The captions grew increasingly affectionate, almost romantic in tone. Then, I stumbled upon a comment thread that stopped me cold. Someone had commented, "Y'all are so cute together. Couple goals." Smiling face with hard eyes, and Caleb had replied with a laughing emoji and the words, "If only she were single, right?" Emma hadn't responded to the comment, but the fact that Caleb had said it, publicly, spoke volumes. I felt the walls closing in. Was it possible Caleb wasn't gay? That Emma had lied to me? Or worse, that I'd been misled all along? That afternoon, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I called a private investigator. His name was Neil, a no-nonsense guy recommended by a friend who'd gone through a rough divorce. I told him everything, from the late-night texts to the hand-holding outside the bar. Neil didn't sugarcoat his response. "It sounds like something's going on," he said. "If they're being that obvious in public, there's a good chance they're hiding even more behind closed doors. I can start surveillance this week." I gave him the details, Emma's usual schedule, Caleb's address, and waited for what felt like an eternity for him to get back to me. In the meantime, I did my best to act normal around Emma. Every moment felt like a test of my patience and willpower. For days later, Neil called. "I've got something you need to see," he said, his voice heavy with meaning. We met in his office, where he handed me a manila envelope filled with photos. I braced myself as I pulled them out. The first few were innocuous enough. Emma and Caleb sitting together at a cafe, walking through the park. But then came the ones that hit me like a freight train. One showed them kissing on Caleb's front porch, Emma's arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Another, taken through a window, showed them sitting on Caleb's couch. Her head was on his shoulder, his hand resting on her thigh. But the final photo was the one that shattered me. They were standing in Caleb's kitchen, holding wine glasses and smiling at each other. Emma's wedding ring was nowhere to be seen. I stared at the pictures, my hands trembling. I felt sick, betrayed, stupid for not seeing it sooner. Neil cleared his throat. "I also did some digging on Caleb," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "You should read this." Inside was a printout of Caleb's recent online activity. My stomach churned as I scanned the details. Dating profiles, messages to women, and men. Caleb wasn't just not gay. He was actively pursuing people of every orientation. My wife was just one more notch in his belt. The betrayal burned hotter now. Emma had lied to me, not just about Caleb's intentions, but about everything. This wasn't a close friendship. It was a full-blown affair, and I was the idiot husband who'd been left in the dark. When I got home that evening, Emma was in the kitchen, humming as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She looked so normal, so unaffected. It made my blood boil. "How was your day?" she asked, flashing me a smile that now felt hollow. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to throw the photos in her face. But I held back. I needed a plan, something better than a heated argument. So I smiled back, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was already plotting my next move. The night felt endless as I sat across from Emma, watching her laugh and chat about her day like nothing was wrong. My mind raced, torn between wanting to confront her and waiting for the perfect moment to expose the truth. I decided to play the long game. If I came at her without a plan, she'd lie, deflect, or twist the narrative. No, I needed something airtight, something she couldn't talk her way out of. For now, I had to act normal. Over the next week, I kept my suspicions to myself. I smiled when she talked about Caleb, nodded along when she mentioned her plans, and even hugged her when she left for her yoga nights. But behind the scenes, I was preparing for the inevitable fallout. I started by meeting with a lawyer. Neil's evidence was damning, and I wanted to ensure I had everything in place before confronting her. My lawyer, Margaret, was sharp and didn't waste time sugarcoating things. "You've got a strong case for divorce based on infidelity," she said, flipping through Neil's photos and reports. "But if this goes to court, be prepared for her to fight back. She may try to claim Caleb's orientation as a defense." I frowned. "But he's clearly not gay." "True, but public perception matters," Margaret said. "We'll need more concrete evidence to counter her claims. Keep gathering proof. And, if you're comfortable, it might be worth having a conversation with Caleb directly." The idea of facing Caleb made my stomach churn, but Margaret had a point. If I could get him to admit to the affair, or even slip up, it would make my case stronger. A few days later, I got my chance. Emma told me she was meeting Caleb for dinner at a downtown wine bar. As soon as she left, I texted Neil, who confirmed their location. Then I headed out, not to follow her this time, but to confront Caleb alone. I parked a block away from Caleb's apartment and waited. Sure enough, less than an hour later, his car pulled into the lot. He was alone, humming to himself as he walked toward his building. I stepped out of the shadows, and his eyes widened when he saw me. "Look," he said, stopping mid-step. "What are you doing here?" I kept my voice calm, though my heart was pounding. "We need to talk." Caleb glanced around, visibly uncomfortable. Now's not really a good time." "Make time," I said firmly, stepping closer. "Unless you'd prefer I do this in front of Emma." That did the trick. He sighed and gestured toward the stairs. "Fine, come inside." Caleb's apartment was as sleek and polished as I'd imagined. He motioned for me to sit on the couch, but I stayed standing. "Look," Caleb started, running a hand through his hair. "If this is about Emma—" "It is," I interrupted. "I know what's been going on." He froze, his expression carefully neutral. "What exactly do you think you know?" I pulled Neil's photos from my jacket pocket and tossed them onto the coffee table. Caleb's face went pale as he picked them up. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice ice cold. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he let out a shaky laugh, setting the photos down. "Okay, fine. Yes, Emma and I were close." "Close?" I echoed, my fist clenching. "You've been having an affair with my wife." "It's not what you think," Caleb said quickly. "We didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." "Spare me the excuses," I snapped. "I want the truth. How long has this been going on?" Caleb hesitated, then muttered, "A few months." My stomach turned, but I kept my composure. "And what about all that talk about being gay? Was that just a cover?" His eyes flickered with something. Guilt? Annoyance? "I'm complicated," he said finally. "I don't like labels. But I never lied about who I am." I scoffed. "You lied to me. And you lied to Emma." Caleb's expression hardened. "Look, I'm not the only one at fault here. Emma made her own choices. She's not some innocent victim." I took a step closer, my voice low and steady. You're right. She's not. But you've destroyed my marriage, and I'm not going to let you walk away from this unscathed. Caleb's bravado faltered, and for the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. What are you going to do? You'll find out soon enough, I said, turning to leave. And trust me, you're not going to like it. As I walked back to my car, a strange sense of calm washed over me. Caleb had confirmed what I already knew, but hearing it from him made it real. There was no more room for doubt, no more excuses to give Emma. The final confrontation was coming, and this time, I'd be the one in control. The morning after my meeting with Caleb, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. It was time to end the charade. No more pretending, no more doubts. I was going to confront Emma that night. To prepare, I arranged for a trusted friend, Mark, to be on standby in case things got out of hand. Mark had been my confidant since I first suspected Emma's affair, and he knew everything. He agreed to wait a few blocks away, ready to step in if needed. I spent the rest of the day organizing the evidence, Neil's photos, Caleb's reluctant confession, and a detailed timeline of Emma's lies. I wanted to be ready for any excuses or manipulations she might throw my way. That evening, Emma came home later than usual. She walked through the door, balancing a bag of takeout and humming a tune. She seemed completely at ease, as if her double life hadn't unraveled in the slightest. Hey babe, she said, setting the bag on the counter. I got your favorite, Thai curry. I didn't respond. Instead, I gestured toward the dining table, where I'd laid out the photos and documents. Emma's smile faltered when she saw them. What's all this? She asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. I folded my arms, keeping my tone steady. You tell me. Her eyes scanned the table, landing on a photo of her and Caleb kissing on his porch. The color drained from her face. Luke, I can explain. Stop, I said, cutting her off. I don't want to hear any lies. Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on? Emma hesitated, her hands trembling as she picked up the photo. It's not what it looks like. I laughed bitterly. Really? Because it looks like you've been having an affair with your gay best friend? She flinched at the venom in my voice. Look, please. It's complicated. Complicated? I repeated, my anger boiling over. You lied to me. You humiliated me. You betrayed everything we built together. What part of that is complicated? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't let them soften me. I'd spent too long feeling like the fool. This was her moment to face the consequences. Fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It started a few months ago. Caleb. He was there for me when I felt like we were drifting apart. I shook my head in disbelief. So instead of talking to me, you turned to him? I didn't plan for this to happen, she said, her tears spilling over. It just did. I didn't mean to hurt you. I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. You didn't mean to hurt me? Do you have any idea what it's like to find out your wife is sneaking around with someone you trusted? Someone you swore was just a friend? She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I'm sorry, Luke. Sorry doesn't cut it, I said coldly. You destroyed this marriage, Emma. You chose him over me. Her tears turned into quiet sobs, but I refused to let her pity sway me. Is he worth it? I asked, my voice sharp. Is Caleb worth everything you've thrown away? Emma didn't answer. Her silence was louder than any confession. I let the weight of my words hang in the air before stepping away from the table. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said, my tone final. The divorce papers are ready. You'll find them in the bedroom. Sign them, and this can be over quickly. Emma's sobs grew louder, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Look, please, she called after me, her voice breaking. We can fix this. We can go to therapy, work through it. I turned, meeting her tear-streaked face with a hard stare. You made your choice, Emma. Now you'll have to live with it. And with that, I walked out, leaving her to face the mess she'd created. That night, I crashed on Mark's couch, too drained to think about what came next. All I knew was that I'd finally taken back control of my life. Emma's betrayal had broken me, but it wouldn't define me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was out, and I was free to start over. The next morning, I woke up at Mark's place with a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. The confrontation with Emma was over, but the fallout had just begun. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy. Divorce, no matter how justified, was messy, but I was determined to see it through. Mark poured me a cup of coffee and asked, "How are you holding up?" I sighed. Better than I thought I'd be, but it still hurts. He nodded, his expression sympathetic. "You did the right thing, man. She didn't deserve you." I appreciated his words, but they didn't erase the ache in my chest. The memories of Emma and the life we'd built together were still fresh, and it would take time to let them go. Over the next few days, I focused on moving forward. I met with my lawyer to finalize the divorce paperwork, ensuring everything was in order. Margaret was confident we had a strong case, especially with the evidence Neil had gathered. Based on the photos, Caleb's confession, and her behavior, she doesn't have much to stand on, Margaret said. We'll push for an equitable split and move quickly to avoid dragging this out. I nodded, grateful for her efficiency. I just want it over with. Meanwhile, Emma reached out repeatedly. She called, texted, even left voicemails, begging me to come home. Each message was more desperate than the last, but I ignored them all. I couldn't let her manipulate me into staying in a marriage that was already dead. Then, one evening, she showed up at Mark's apartment. I was sitting on the couch when I heard the knock at the door. Mark answered, and I could hear Emma's voice, shaky and pleading. "Is Luke here? Please, I just need to talk to him." Mark turned to me, his face uncertain. I nodded, standing and bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. Emma stepped inside, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. "Luke, please, can we talk?" I crossed my arms, keeping my tone cold. "What's there to talk about? You made your choice." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake. I don't want to lose you." Her words stung, but I held firm. "Emma, you lost me the moment you decided Caleb was more important than our marriage." She took a step closer, her voice desperate. "I can fix this. I'll cut him off completely. I'll do whatever it takes." I laughed bitterly. "Do you think that erases everything you've done? Do you think I can just forget?" Her sobs grew louder, but I refused to let my resolve waver. "You didn't just betray me, Emma. You lied to my face. You made me question everything about us. And for what? A fling with a man you swore was just a friend?" She tried to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. "It's over. I've already started the divorce process. You need to accept that." Emma collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I can't believe I've ruined everything," she whispered. Her remorse felt genuine, but it didn't change the reality of what had happened. I couldn't go back, no matter how much she cried or begged. After she left, Mark sat beside me, letting out a low whistle. That was intense. I nodded, feeling emotionally drained. It needed to happen. He clapped me on the shoulder. "You're stronger than most people, Luke. Don't forget that." In the weeks that followed, I began rebuilding my life piece by piece. I moved into a small apartment across town, distancing myself from the memories of Emma and our shared life. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects to keep my mind occupied. And slowly, I started reconnecting with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, thanks to Margaret's meticulous preparation. Emma didn't contest the terms, maybe out of guilt, or maybe because she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. Within 3 months, the papers were signed, and I was officially free. One day, months later, I ran into a mutual friend who casually mentioned that Caleb had moved out of town. Apparently, his reputation had taken a hit after word of the affair spread through our social circle. Emma, too, had become more reclusive, avoiding the places we used to frequent. Hearing this gave me no satisfaction. Their lives were their own mess to deal with now. I had no interest in revenge or lingering bitterness. All I wanted was peace. And, for the first time in a long time, I was finally starting to find it. Months passed, and the wounds Emma had left began to heal, though the scars remained. I found solace in routine, waking up in my modest apartment, working long hours, and spending weekends reconnecting with myself. It wasn't an easy process, but every small step felt like a victory. One of the first breakthroughs came during a conversation with Mark. We were sitting on his porch, sipping beers as the sun dipped below the horizon. "You know," he said, breaking the comfortable silence, You're handling this better than most people would." I laughed dryly. "You weren't there for the breakdowns, Mark. You saw the aftermath, not the wreckage." "Still," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you didn't let it destroy you. A lot of guys in your shoes would have gone off the rails." I thought about his words that night. He was right. I hadn't let Emma's betrayal define me. Sure, there were moments of anger and despair, but I'd channeled that pain into rebuilding my life. And slowly, I was beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The turning point came one evening when I decided to clear out an old box of memories. It had been sitting in my closet, untouched since I moved into the apartment. Inside were photos of Emma and me, vacations, birthdays, candid moments that once meant everything. Looking at them now, they felt like relics from another life. One photo in particular caught my eye. It was from our honeymoon, taken on a beach at sunset. Emma was laughing, her hair tousled by the wind, while I held her close. We looked happy, truly happy. For a moment, I let myself grieve, not for her, but for the version of us that had existed before the lies and betrayal. Then, with a deep breath, I put the photo back in the box and taped it shut. It was time to move on. Rebuilding my social life was another challenge. For years, Emma had been the center of our social circle, and many of our mutual friends had distanced themselves after the divorce. But a few reached out, offering support and solidarity. One of those friends was Lisa, a colleague from work who had always been kind and understanding. She invited me out for coffee one afternoon, and what started as a casual chat soon turned into a genuine connection. We bonded over shared experiences, swapping stories about career ambitions and personal setbacks. "I never understood what Emma saw in Caleb," Lisa said at one point, her tone laced with disbelief. "You deserved so much better." I shrugged, trying to keep the bitterness at bay. "Maybe, but it's not about what I deserved. It's about what I choose to do now." She smiled, her eyes warm. "And what are you choosing?" "To let it go," I said simply. "To focus on what's ahead instead of what's behind me." As the months turned into a year, I began to feel like myself again, stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I took up new hobbies, like hiking and photography, rediscovering passions I'd long neglected. I even started volunteering at a local community center, teaching tech skills to underprivileged kids. It gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. Emma occasionally crossed my mind, but the pain of her betrayal had dulled to a distant ache. I no longer felt anger or resentment, just a quiet acceptance of what had been and what could never be again. One day, as I was walking through the park with my camera, I spotted a family playing frisbee. The father's laughter echoed as he chased after his young son, while the mother clapped and cheered. For a moment, I stopped to watch, feeling a pang of longing. That could have been me, I thought. But then, just as quickly, I realized something. It still could be. Emma's betrayal hadn't robbed me of the chance to find love or build a family. It had simply redirected my path, forcing me to reevaluate what I wanted and who I wanted to share it with. As I snapped a photo of the family in the distance, a sense of peace washed over me. I was finally ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, my life had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. The man who sat broken on Mark's couch, drowning in anger and disbelief, felt like a distant memory. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The first real milestone came in the form of a promotion. My hard work and renewed focus hadn't gone unnoticed at the office. My boss, impressed by the results I delivered over the past year, offered me the role of senior operations manager. It was a position I'd been eyeing for years, but the chaos of my personal life had always held me back. "Congratulations, Luke," my boss said as he handed me the official letter. "You've earned this." As I shook his hand, a wave of pride surged through me. It wasn't just about the title or the pay raise. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of rebuilding, of achieving something meaningful despite the setbacks. On the personal front, my connection with Lisa had deepened. What started as casual coffee chats had grown into something more. We'd spent countless evenings talking about everything: our dreams, our fears, the lessons we'd learned from life's curveballs. One evening, as we strolled through the park, Lisa turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about the future? About starting over?" Her question caught me off guard, but only for a moment. I nodded. All the time. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not scared of it. She smiled, her hand brushing against mine. I think you're ready for it. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Maybe I am. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly. I received an email from Emma. The subject line was simple: I'm sorry. For a moment, I debated whether to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Her message was heartfelt but bittersweet. She admitted to her mistakes, to the lies and selfishness that had driven us apart. She told me she'd ended things with Caleb not long after the divorce and had spent the past year reflecting on her choices. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she wrote, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. You were the best thing in my life, and I let it slip through my fingers. I stared at the words for a long time, feeling a strange mix of emotions: sadness, pity, and, most surprising of all, peace. Emma's apology didn't change the past, but it gave me the closure I hadn't realized I needed. I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. Her chapter in my life was over, and I was finally ready to close the book. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of a rocky overlook, the wind tugging at my jacket as I stared out at the horizon. Lisa was beside me, her camera slung over her shoulder. We'd decided to take a weekend trip to the mountains, a spontaneous getaway that felt like a celebration of everything we'd both overcome. Ready to head back? She asked, her eyes sparkling in the sunlight. Not yet, I said, taking her hand. Let's stay a little longer. She smiled, leaning into me as we watched the sun dip below the mountains. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Real, tangible hope for the future. Emma's betrayal had been a devastating blow, but it had also been a wake-up call. It forced me to confront my own resilience, to rediscover my strength, and to seek out the happiness I deserved. And now, standing on that mountaintop with Lisa, I realized something. The best chapters of my life weren't behind me. They were just beginning.